Hello there. Welcome to Just a Dis. We talk about Blu-rays here and, of course, 4Ks. And I just have this to say, which is, I shall not cause harm to any vehicle, nor the personal contents thereof, nor through inaction let the personal contents thereof come to harm. And if you're a fan of this movie, Repo Man, that should sound very familiar because it is Harry Dean Stanton's character's repo code. And so we're talking about the new 4K Criterion release of Repo Man, which is a fascinating movie to me because it has gone from, fringe cult movie status to almost mainstream classic status, and I think that's a fascinating journey that it's had, and I'm a big fan of it, and actually I become a bigger fan of it every time I watch it. It's one of those movies that just gets better and better and better and better and funnier, and I just notice more things every time I watch it. So anyway, I'm a big fan of the movie, and I was very excited about this 4K release. Now, this movie, as I said, to me has always been a cult movie, maybe like almost the quintessential cult movie, the kind of movie that you watch and go, oh man, that was weird, that was not like anything I've ever seen before, that is super cool, I want to watch it again, I want to tell people about it. That's sort of like, the idea for me behind a lot of cult movies is that they draw that fandom immediately and kind of make you, and you may, I think my reaction too with a lot of cult movies was, I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not sure if I like that. In fact, I remember, and what's neat about this is that you can kind of recreate these sections, but I remember going into a lot of video stores around, where I grew up, and especially the ones in the city, in Madison, they all had cult sections. They had a cult movie section, and every single one of them had Repo Man in their cult section. And that always caught my eye. I was like, what is Repo Man? And then I started to notice the other kinds of movies they had in those cult sections, and they were consistently things like Pink Flamingos, which, as I was saying before, what's neat about this is now this is in a pristine Blu-ray, actually from Criterion. But at the time, all these tapes, Repo Man was a studio release, it was a Universal tape, so it was a little more it was a little more common. It was in better shape than like the Pink Flamingos tape, which was inevitably beat up. They'd also have, other John Waters stuff like Polyester and Lust in the Dust. Female Trouble was typically in. John Waters sort of ruled those cult sections. And a lot of times, like I said, those tapes were in rough shape. But now we have pristine Blu-rays, which I love. Eraserhead was always in those cult sections. And it was a Columbia tape, but it was super rare, and it was hard to get. And I remember I actually was able to talk. I was working at a Blockbuster at the time on State Street in Madison, near the University of Wisconsin, where I was going to college. And we had another video store down the street called 4-Star Video, which, I'll be honest, was just a better video store in a lot of ways, because they were very fringe, they were very alternative and cult-oriented, and so their entire store was kind of a cult section and a cinephile haven. They just had tons of cool stuff there that we couldn't get, but I did my best to try and bring in some cool stuff. So I was able to get another Blockbuster to send us their old Eraserhead tape. And it rented okay, but it was in rough shape. But again, now we have a beautiful Blu-ray of that. Another one that was always around Repo Man was Liquid Sky, which now, has a I think out of print. Nice Blu-ray from Vinegar Syndrome. But yeah, these movies, I was like, what are these films? What is this about? And why are they in this section? And that was even before I discovered Danny Perry's cult movie books or his Guide for the Film Fanatic, which I'll get to in a second. Surprisingly, I was looking through the cult movies books, and Repo Man's not in Cult Movies 1, 2, and 3. It is in the Guide for the Film Fanatic. But anyway, let me, now that I'm on that subject, Guide for the Film Fanatic, my favorite book of all time. Here's what Danny has to say. Danny Perry has to say about it. He says, a completely daffy, fast-paced satire parody about L.A. punk, quote-unquote, Emilio Estevez, who takes a job repossessing cars. He meets an assortment of spacey characters and has a series of odd and dangerous adventures, including one in the science fiction realm. Film runs out of gas eventually, but the direction by unknown Alex Cox is consistently clever and ambitious. Cox has a gifted eye and ear for comedy. It's interesting listening to various Repo Men spout personal philosophy or argue over such important things. Just because, an immediate cult film due to near simultaneous theatrical and video releases. I didn't know that. Full of offbeat touches and surprises, Estevez gives a confident performance. Harry Dean Stanton is well cast as his repo recruiter. Also with Tracy Walter, the spaciest of all, Vanetta McGee, Olivia Barish, Cy Richardson, Susan Barnes. So, Danny doesn't fully, I don't know, he didn't usually, if he liked something, it didn't mean that it, or if he didn't like something, didn't mean it didn't make it into the book. So I'm not sure why it never made it into any version of the Cult Movies books that I could see. But obviously he wrote about it there. He acknowledges its cult status, and it's just one of those movies that once you see it, it's either going to be your bag. I mean, like I said, you could have an initial bristling, and like I think I did. And I think I'd seen it obviously after I'd seen The Breakfast Club. I'd seen Emilio Estevez in some other films. He did that before he had already been in The Outsiders. He'd already done a couple things before that, but it was kind of a big, I don't want to say breakout, because I don't know how it affected his career ultimately, because he would break out big time with Breakfast Club the next year. But I know that his agents did not want him to do it. They were trying to position him, because of The Outsiders and some other stuff, only to do big movies. And I've heard this time and time again, where you have an agent that like either is hired, after a previous agent is fired, and they've made a commitment to, bolster or boost the career of the actor, and so they tend to swat down offers of odd, idiosyncratic films in favor of, bigger stuff. But in this case, the script was able to be gotten to Emilio, and he liked it. And, I know that Dick Rude, who's also in the movie and who was a friend of Alex Cox's, and who would have been probably pretty good, although I don't think he would have been as good as Emilio personally. But you can actually see some antagonism between Dick Rude and Emilio's character. I mean, I know it's supposed to exist in the movie, but I think you can feel that extra pissed off energy from Dick Rude. He's one of the sort of like other punks that's running around robbing places, and sort of steals Emilio's girlfriend, I think. Kind of. Anyway, I just was totally perplexed, as I said, by the movie, but certainly by Emilio's performance, because he plays sort of a nihilistic, disaffected, just doesn't seem to care about anything, jerk of a character. Like the only thing he does care about is getting laid, and he's just, and I don't know, there's just something about him that's off-putting in a way that I couldn't at the time connect with the first time I saw it, because I was like, he plays Andrew the wrestler, who's also kind of a jock jerk in Breakfast Club. And so I didn't love that character, but it was a character at least I was like, oh, I know that guy. I've met that character. But this character, I was like, I don't know. Being from, suburban Wisconsin, I hadn't really met a lot of disaffected punk type characters, as much as he was playing that. And so that put me off to begin with. But what didn't put me off and what definitely pulled me in was Harry Dean Stanton, who plays Bud, I believe, and who is like sort of the mentor, Repo Man. He spots Emilio walking through the streets, and he immediately hooks him with a gag about having to move his wife's car out of this bad area because his wife's pregnant and he's got to get it out. And so he gets him to take this car, and he doesn't even know he's a Repo Man. In fact, when he comes to the offices of the Repo Man, and then it's like, hey, where's your old lady? And Harry Dean kind of makes like some excuse. Suddenly he realizes they're Repo Men, and he'd been given a beer by one of the guys running the place. He dumps it all over the floor. He's like, I don't want to be a Repo Man. And Vanetta McGee is like, too late. Here's your, $25 for repo in that car you just did. And so then it becomes sort of a mentor-mentee relationship movie. And I love Harry Dean Stanton's character. I love his take on the character. I love his philosophies. The repo code is a lot of fun, but he just, especially after he does Speed at one point, he just starts going off about stuff. And he's out of control in this movie. In fact, so much out of control that there are stories about how there's a scene where he's using a bat I won't get into it, but basically the scene calls for him to use a bat. And they wanted him to use a, like foam bat or something, and he refused because he's like, people will be able to tell the difference. They'll be able to see that it's not a real baseball bat. And so he had a real, I think, wooden baseball bat that he was swinging around. And he almost got fired off the movie in that space because Alex Cox was sort of losing control of him, and I think ultimately didn't have the best experience working with him, which is always an interesting thing to me when the performance is so good. So you have to give some credit to the director, I think, but also he's clearly off doing his own things. He's suggesting things that maybe Alex Cox doesn't want to do. And certainly this bat thing was scary enough that they, Robbie Mueller, the cinematographer, by the way, a beautifully shot movie, for I think $1 million budget, executive produced by Michael Nesmith of the Monkees, who had done not a lot in terms of movie. He'd done Time Rider, with, Fred Ward, which is out of print on Blu-ray, but, and he would go on to do some other stuff, but I think this is, his crowning achievement. And I love the Monkees, but I do think him, making this happen and getting Universal involved and allowing it to sort of get out there a little more, I think really helped the movie. So anyway, Robbie Mueller said that he felt the wind of the bat, fanning his face, and he was just like, I'm not going to shoot this guy anymore. This is getting out of control. So like, Harry Dean's off the rails, but I think it ultimately works for the character because there is points where he's just yelling and screaming and doing crazy stuff, and it's just it's something else. But I think it's one of the great performances that he ever gave. Just really, really great stuff. In terms of Emilio, I forgot. Okay, so he did The Breakfast Club the next year. He had done Nightmares, the TV movie, where he's part of the Bishop of Battle sequence from that movie, and he'd done The Outsiders, where he had a decent role in that. And he's very good in that, too. And he'd done Tex in 1982, which is... but he's so good here, and so is the supporting cast. Cy Richardson, who would get used by Alex Cox. Again, I'll talk about him in a second. I basically have a stack of recommendations, and some will be pretty obvious that, things you could watch if you like Repo Man. But anyway, Cy Richardson, fantastic. And the fact that Harry Dean was problematic, and so that they actually had to give Cy Richardson a bigger part in some ways. They gave him a scene where he basically has to shoot at a client that's shooting at Emilio Estevez. He becomes like a second mentor, and I think part of that has to do with that Harry Dean was so out of control, they had to just give some scenes to Cy Richardson to kind of... And I think that works. I think it makes the movie better. So those crazy little things that happen on a movie can benefit it ultimately. Tracy Walter, fantastic. I mean, he's his famous plate of shrimp speech is one for the ages of cinema of all time. The more you drive, the less intelligent you are. I definitely feel that as a now California native for 25 years. I feel it. Vanetta McGee is great. Again, Dick Rude, pretty good in his part. I think the movie has great uses of some iconic Los Angeles locations like the LA River. Even a couple scenes that you see in the Terminator the same year, the LA River, and then there's this one overpass where in the Terminator they crash a car. You'll recognize it. It's like I've only ever seen it in a couple, maybe three, maybe it was in To Live and Die in LA too. I don't even know where it is, but it's a great little, there's like a bridge above it and it's really brightly lit. And anyway, but in general, the film spends a lot of time on the streets of LA, and between the way Robbie Mueller shoots it, what we get to see of LA the way it looks during the daytime, sort of sun-soaked in this really specific way, and at night when it's lit by streetlights and buildings and neon and sunsets. There's one beautiful shot of Otto sitting near the railroad tracks, and there's a bridge behind him, and the sun is setting. It's just gorgeous, and it's so wonderful that Alex Cox wanted to work with Robbie Mueller because of, I think it was because of The American Friend was what he called out, but he's one of the great cinematographers, and if you don't know his work, you really kind of do, because he's worked on so many films. And so point being is the 4K looks good partially because his photography is so good, so it just elevates that. So on that level, it's another Criterion thing where they don't give you a bunch of extras that are new, which is always a bummer, but the upgrade is, to me, worth it because it looks good and it's a great cinematographer. So anyway, I'm all scattered, which is kind of fitting in this review. But Robbie Mueller worked with Jim Jarmusch on Down by Law, Mystery Train, Dead Man, Ghost Dog, Wim Wenders on Alice in the Cities, Kings of the Road, American Friend, Paris, Texas, which just got a 4K release announced. Peter Bogdanovich, he worked on Saint Jack and They All Laughed. Friedkin, he worked on To Live and Die in L.A. Barbet Schroeder and Lars von Trier, he worked with them as well. He worked on Breaking the Waves. I mean, he just is a brilliant cinematographer. I was even showing my friend Elric this movie Body Rock, which is also from '84. Lorenzo Lamas breakdancing, kind of a response to Breakin', from New World, but it's beautifully shot by Robbie Mueller. It just looks amazing. So anyway, I love that about it. The beauty of the way it's shot really elevates an interesting and weird movie. And yeah, there's some great directorial touches. The script, I think, is really interesting because it is about, weirdness in LA, aliens, Chevy Malibu that's got something in the trunk that's definitely an homage to Kiss Me Deadly. It's really funny, interesting stuff. It also has a great and iconic soundtrack featuring Black Flag, The Circle Jerks, Suicidal Tendencies. Iggy Pop did the opening theme, which is great. The Plugs, and the film score was created by Tito Lariva, Stephen Hofstetter, Charlie Quintana, and Tony Marsico of the Plugs. And I guess Iggy Pop volunteered to write the title song after his manager viewed a screening of the film. So all that adds to the cult appeal of this film. It's also one of the first films I ever saw that ran the credits in the reverse direction. The credits come down from the top as opposed to going up. And that's an interesting choice, but just another little detail that I think is great. So anyway, this, of course, includes a 4K and a Blu-ray, and a book. I mean, this is a full-on book. Emilio says intense. Plus an essay by critic Sam McFeeters, an illustrated production history by Cox, and a 1987 interview with real-life Repo Man Mark Lewis, who I believe was either a friend of Alex Cox's or a roommate of a friend of Alex Cox's, and gave a lot of the stories that sort of influenced the movie and certain things that Harry Dean said and maybe Cy Richardson said. So yeah, this is really neat. It's got animated stuff. It's got synopsis, pre-production budget summaries. It's a beautiful, neat little book. And I love the illustrations in it, and it adds to the really. This is Sam McFeeder's little review. Released in early 1984, was the first feature by a 29-year-old British UCLA film school graduate named Alex Cox. Even now, the film's existence seems implausible. It is an apocalypse tale with no doomsday, a punk movie with no concert, a science fiction story with less than 10 seconds of aliens. Most of its now classic music was on the far, far edge of American society in 1984. Just some things to keep in mind. You know, it is one of those movies that there's just some amazing, special, almost accidents that happen in cinema that I love that create these classics. So anyway, in terms of the features, this is nothing new, but you have, of course, the new 4K digital restoration approved by director Alex Cox, audio commentary featuring Cox, executive producer Michael Nesmith, casting director Victoria Thomas, actors Cy Richardson, Xander Schloss, and Del Zamora. I think that goes all the way back to the Anchor Bay DVD. I could be wrong, but I think it's been around a while. Interviews with musicians Iggy Pop and Keith Morris, and actors Dick Rude, Olivia Barish, and Miguel Sandoval. Deleted scenes, roundtable discussion about the making of the film featuring Cox, Richardson, Rude, Zamora, and producers Peter McCarthy and Jonathan Wax. Conversation between McCarthy and actor Harry Dean Stanton, which is solid. Cox's cleaned up television version of the film. You can actually watch that. And then the essays that I mentioned. Cover illustration by Jay Shaw and Tyler Stout, which is a great cover. So it's one of my favorite Criterions, and so there was no way that I wouldn't want to get the 4K, but like I said, it looks good, and it complements the Mueller cinematography, and, you know, if you're a fan, I think you gotta grab it. So, anyway, so as I promised, I've got a few more recommendations, like if you like this, you'll like these kind of stuff, and I'll go through these really fast, because there's a lot of them, but obviously Straight to Hell is Alex Cox's movie that he did a little while after this. He did Sid and Nancy, which I couldn't find my Blu-ray, but also I like it. I think it, you know, you could, if you like Repo Man, you could dig it, but it's a different vibe, and I feel like Straight to Hell is a little bit more of a similar weird, you know, vibe. Like, this is a modern-day spaghetti western. Again, Cy Richardson is back, as is Dick Rude and Joe Strummer and Courtney Love, and it has the Pogues, Elvis Costello, Dennis Hopper, Grace Jones, Jim Jarmusch. This is the director's cut from Kino, but it's fun and it's weird, and it's in I think it's the closest thing to Repo Man that he did after Repo Man. Another one that, and I'll recommend a lot of her movies, Penelope Spheeris' film Dudes with John Cryer and Daniel Roebuck, punk rock western. So again, that sort of lines, actually you could really double that with Straight to Hell pretty well. Yeah, it's an interesting. Catherine Mary Stewart's in this one. That's a Shout Factory Blue, as is Suburbia, also Penelope Spheeris. This one pretty closely, it's a little more dramatic. Like, it's not as, but there is some weirdness with a bunch of kids living in an abandoned house, punk kids. It feels like these punk kids could wander into Repo Man maybe, although that the Repo Man universe is a little more heightened than this. This is a bit grittier maybe, I don't know, but definitely a movie you could watch with Repo Man. And then obviously the Decline of Western Civilization collection. Penelope Spheeris did those as well. Those are all punk. Well, actually, there's punk in the first, and then, you know, metal, and I still feel like they all could be part of, you know, the Repo Man arena. Smithereens, the first film from Susan Seidelman, who would do Desperately Seeking Susan, which is almost sort of a Repo Man thing, but maybe not quite weird enough in my opinion. But this was one that actually I did see alongside Repo Man in the cult sections, and the tape was always kind of tore up. It was an old, I can't remember what kind of tape, but this has a similar energy to Repo Man in terms of the main characters. The Ren character is, I think, very similar to Otto in certain ways, but again, this is a bit more dramatic. It's not as goofy as Repo Man, but I do feel like it could complement Repo Man, and it feels of a piece with the kinds of, again, disaffected characters that you see in Repo Man. Of course, Repo Man is LA, Smithereens is New York. I like the contrast there as well, but definitely one that could work for that. True Stories. This is another Criterion. This one, directed by David Byrne. This one actually kind of lines up with the Goofy World vibe of Repo Man in the best way of all these. Actually, there's one more that lines up with that world pretty well. I'll do that last, but it's obvious and you'll have seen it. But anyway, I feel like this kind of works with Repo Man as well. True Stories. This is a little bit of a left field, but this movie Serial from 1980. About it says, inspired by the Sierra McFadden novel Serial, A Year in the Life of Marin County. Serial is director Bill Persky's satirical look at the lifestyles of California's 1970s hippie culture. So it's kind of like these richer folks living on the coast of California. So it feels like this one also, this one has a goofy tone as well. So it matches the vibe of Repo Man, but also it feels like if you move from downtown LA out to the coast, in 84, maybe not quite, but almost, you're still having some of this kind of hippie weirdness on the coast that could kind of work. But anyway, it's a similar satirical kind of jokey look. And then, of course, Buckaroo Banzai, which I think almost perfectly lines up with the goofy tone of Repo Man. Not perfectly, but it's got sci-fi, it's got incredibly quotable dialogue, it's got an incredible cast. I mean, you could do a double of these two and you'd be pretty darn happy, I think. But again, it's obvious. And this is another one that I used to see in those cult sections all the time. So it lines up that you put these two together. But I love that, again, that was like a Vestron video VHS tape, right? And those were, even in the late 80s or 90s when I started to really get into video store culture, those tapes were out of print. Like, you couldn't get Buckaroo Banzai anymore. So it was rare. And now that it's, I mean, actually this Blu-ray might be out of print for all I remember, but the fact that we've gotten these in nice editions and that they're much easier to get now is so different to me in a lot of ways than the times when I was first getting into cult movies. Anyway, it's a glorious time to be a cinephile. It's a glorious time to be a fan of cult movies because we are getting 4K releases of things like Repo Man, and I couldn't be happier about it. I really couldn't. So gets a high recommend from me. It's just a favorite and a movie that, in rewatching it on 4K, I loved it as much as ever, if not more. So definitely check it out and grab it, at the next sale or whenever you're planning to pick up some more Criterions. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.